Hello. How's everybody doing? Saturday morning. I'm glad everybody made it. So that's great. Also, I have no government secrets to reveal, so I apologize. That's the next door here. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about Metaverse. So just kind of obviously in the Metaverse zone here. I think they did a great job here at CoinDesk. But talk a little bit about, from our perspective, of Mythical Games. So I'm CEO of Mythical Games, and what we've seen in the gaming industry, some of the evolution we've seen, and kind of where we think this is going next. So that's the talk. How are people using the metaverse right now, and kind of where do we go from here? I think that's really the key that I want to get through in the next 20, 30 minutes here. So I think first I thought I'd start off with kind of evolution of digital content, right? So we've definitely seen, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. We've seen this evolution over the last, 30 years of kind of moving from a read system to a write system to now this own system. So we think this is obviously, it's been a very interesting kind of migration, but we're also seeing a similar evolution in the gaming industry. So a little bit of background, I used to be at a studio head at Activision Blizzard. So I mostly worked on the Call of Duty franchise. So if you've played Call of Duty, I probably was responsible for part of that. And then moved over to the Skylanders franchise. So we started doing this concept of like toys to life and how do you have these physical toys that become digital toys. Started thinking, it was really interesting. Kind of thinking about, scarcity, but also thinking about verified ownership and how do you have a physical product that becomes a digital product. And it really became, we started looking at the industry in general. So we had this huge opportunity that happened, maybe 15 years ago with free-to-play. And this was a huge moment for gaming. We had, suddenly games became free, mobile, you could have all these free-to-play games on mobile. And we started seeing this explosion of gamers in the industry. So we went from about 100 million gamers in the industry to now we're just about 4 billion gamers worldwide, which is a very significant part of the entire world population. So that was a big thing. We kind of call it a democratization of game access. The second one that happened then, one more slide, there we go, was content. So we had the kind of this Roblox generation, the Minecraft generation, and what we started seeing is these big worlds of sandboxes and all that to where anyone could come in and build. So anybody could come in, and we ended up having this explosion of content to where there was more content than any one game studio could produce. So this was a huge moment. We had huge amounts of stakeholders who are getting involved. People are getting involved in gaming. It was no longer kind of this game dev, game pub, IP consumer relationship. There's a lot of people getting involved. So where we see this going next is kind of what we think the concept of metaverse, right? Oh, not sure why that one disappeared, but anyway. And what we see this now is kind of the democratization of game economies. How do we take all of these stakeholders and bring them into these virtual worlds together? And that's kind of what we're seeing. We think this new pillar will be a lasting, long-term lasting effect on the entire game industry. And we're already seeing this happen. We're seeing lots of stakeholders are coming into this. Again, we're starting to see brands, we're seeing artists, we're seeing celebrities, influencers, esports, musicians, players themselves are becoming entrepreneurial. So this is already happening in a very fast pace right now. So we like to think of this as, this is an evolution, not a revolution, right? So this is anybody that's kind of going from, hey, we're going to change the world, and suddenly have this new form of content and new form of entertainment. We think that's a tough path. If you're kind of going from 0 to 100, you're going to have some challenges getting there. So we like to think of this as kind of, how do we evolve, right? How do we take what we have now in gaming, which is already a $220 billion industry? How do we take that and slowly evolve that into this next generation? So what we've done at Mythical is we've been testing the boundaries of this, right? So we started off with a game called Blanco's Block Party. It was a PC Mac game. It was really a game first and foremost. We started thinking about, how does this new economy start affecting this? And the reason, honestly, we chose these cute little characters here, we basically built a world around vinyl toys. And the reason we did that was there's a lot of interesting parallels. One, we're kind of vinyl toy nerds ourselves, so we like to collect all these toys. But what we started seeing is that the way the vinyl toy industry was really situated in the real world is they would take these 3D canvases, these blank, hence the name Blancos, blank canvases of these silhouettes, and then artists would take them, create their own kind of magic with them, right? They'd create their own designs around these silhouettes, and they'd resell them to their own communities. And that was like, well, that's really interesting kind of parallel to where we're seeing Web3 go. So we started thinking about that. We started proving out a couple ideas here. How do you have player owns? How do players get to own these? They can start making decisions with these. We have scarcity, so different brands can come in at different levels and say, hey, we want them to be Supreme style. We want them to everybody line up at 7 a.m. on Saturday, and it's going to be a very fast sellout. Or, hey, we want to maximize and hit everybody with an item. So what we started seeing is that has different patterns on how these sell, right? We decided to do them serialized, so we kind of took a play out of the baseball card or the trading card playbook, and started having to where each one was serialized. So we actually started ours in the box. And I think one mistake we made maybe a little bit with this is we started them in the box. So they literally like a collectible, and then you had to unbox them. And we made a decision early on that, okay, well, once you unbox them, you can't put them back in the box, right? And what we found from that is it had tremendous, tremendous impact on how people collect. Some of them were good, some of them were not so good. So the not so good were basically a lot of people didn't open them. They didn't play with them. They just wanted to keep them in the box on their shelf. In fact, I think we have like probably 70% or something crazy high number are literally just left in their box. But what we did see that was really interesting is people started buying 2, or they'd buy 3. They put one on the shelf and leave it as a collector's item. They'd buy another one and open it and play with it. Maybe they'd buy a 3rd to where they could start mashing it up and changing it up. So we started seeing this major shift in what was happening in these games. And then obviously, they're all NFTs behind the scenes. And we want to make sure with the gaming world that we could really blend the world of fiat and cryptocurrencies together. So this was kind of our first take. This is what we did initially to kind of start understanding that. And we saw so many really cool things happen besides just the buying patterns. We also saw play patterns starting to shift. And that was really interesting for us. Coming from the PC console industry, coming from the mobile industry, we started seeing people are kind of playing these games differently. They're starting to think about access differently. So this is one we started, we were really glad to get this out there. Games in PC and Mac right now, over 1 million accounts now. So we were actually starting to see some pretty good numbers out of this and starting to get some really good understanding of the industry. So we actually just recently announced a new game called NFL Rivals. And we're very excited about this. And unfortunately, I can't share too much on this yet. We'll be revealing a lot of information over the next few weeks. But the idea behind this is, okay, great. Let's take a big brand like the NFL. And how do we change again? How do we not just sell items that's not as exciting to us? We don't want to just sell those items, but how do we start thinking about the fan engagement? How do you start interacting with the players? How do you interact with the teams? And that's what we're really excited about is how do we take this? And you actually even see from some of the key art already, it's not just logos slapped on helmets, right? We're really trying to dive into that fan engagement. And that's the power of where we go with Metaverse and Web3 in general is that we can change how entertainment is done. So I also want to show some other ones. Obviously, it's not just a Mythical talk, right? I want to talk a little bit about some of the other ones out there, right? So obviously, we've seen some amazing early kind of growth in things like Decentraland, Sandbox, groups like this. And I think they're doing a lot of things very well. I think there's a lot of things we're already doing really well. So I think, first of all, what's working? Stakeholder interest, as I mentioned, is there. I think there's Snoop Dogs in a lot of these worlds, and all these different groups are kind of joining now. So the stakeholders are definitely taking interest. Brands are taking a major interest in how they kind of interact with their consumers. Web3 infrastructure, I think obviously you can see this from the conference, but I think we're making tremendous strides in where Web3 goes and with the infrastructure behind it, as well as the peer-to-peer marketplaces. But the other one I think that's doing really interesting is gamifying land. And I think that's something to think about when you start thinking about these, okay, if I'm having people come in and own, it's a game in and of itself. And I think, frankly, Sandbox has done a beautiful job of gamifying that land in a very light way, right? So you have a fixed map, and they've even done some basic stuff saying, okay, well, you can buy 1 plot of land, but if you buy 9 that are contiguous, you can put your logo up there, right? So now it becomes this game in and of itself to start annexing these lands together so that I can have a bigger responsibility. And I think we're going to see a lot of evolution around this space, tiered functionality. The more land you have, the more functionality you have. So I think we're seeing some really cool stuff already, even in the short amount of time we've been in this industry. But what I really want to talk about is kind of where do we go? So I think what are the growth vectors we need to be thinking about in Metaverse? And this is really from our perspective, coming from the game industry, coming from decades of experience in the game industry, things we've seen work, and how do we kind of bring that into this new world? So I think the first one for us is, I'm missing my slides didn't quite happen here. There's another one here. But basically thinking about, maybe it's on the next one here. There we go. So basically, what is the gameplay, right? I think what's really interesting and something that we've done really well in our careers with franchises like Call of Duty, franchises like World of Warcraft. Even my last title we did in mobile was a game called Marvel Strike Force. And that game is on its 5th year now. I think it's doing nearly $1 billion a year now in its 5th year. So what's driving that? It's longevity, right? Value is created by longevity. It's not a quick flip. If you're in it to kind of sell something fast and flip it fast for a profit, that's not going to create long-term value. So I think with Metaverse, we have to keep that in mind. Longevity needs purpose, right? We need to have gamer-first worlds. We need to be thinking and not forgetting about things like world building and lore and narrative, right? But it's going to be different than we've ever seen before. And we've had some really great opportunities to talk with even Hollywood producers and Hollywood writers now, big Hollywood writers. They're starting to think about this, right? How do I tell a story that's not super on rails? You know, Call of Duty or a Last of Us or an Uncharted. It's a very on-rails story. Maybe not quite as much as linear media, but it's still on rails, right? There's only so many paths you can follow before we drive you back into the next narrative. But what happens now when you have a world in the metaverse, right? You have a game in the metaverse that suddenly Starbucks appears. You know, how do you react to Starbucks in your world, right? And that's something we have to identify, and that's going to be a big piece that's going to drive that. But as we think through these lore, cannot forget about that. As we think about all the world building principles we've learned in gaming over the last decades, we have to bring that into these worlds. The second one, there we go, is user roles. I think this is such a critical one, is users need something to do. They need to have a purpose themselves. They need to have a hierarchy. And I think this is something we really think about. As I mentioned before, we're really seeing these play patterns shift at a very, very rapid rate. So what do you do, right? And I think the ones we've kind of come up with in terms of the major pillars are kind of owners, builders, and explorers. And I think that's, you can go very deep in this, but I think you have to think through these concepts if you're going to build these metaverse experiences that last, right? What do you do if you own something in the game? What's that experience? How do you react to the other player types? Maybe people can't afford, you know, that's one thing remember, free to play was so huge because we brought these gamers in. It is a free game still. So in the metaverses, we need the similar concepts. So what do you do if you can't afford to come buy a piece of land? Well, maybe you become a builder, right? So there's a lot of creativity that can come out. We've already seen this again in Blankos, to where we've had hundreds of thousands of worlds built, and builders will always take your tech to the absolute limit. They'll push the envelope in what you can do. How do you reward them for doing that? How do you match them up with these owners and things like that? And then the players themselves, right? A lot of them don't want to view themselves as creative. They just want to come and be part of it. So how do you think about the world of exploration? How do you reward people for coming in and finding new things and discovering things and telling people? So I think these are big pieces we have to keep identifying in the world in the metaverse world. And then the last one here, there we go, is new infrastructure. What we're also learning is that even in a game like Blankos is not an Unreal 5 engine. Unreal 5 games, by default, they're about 40, 50 gigabytes now. Call of Duty Warzone, it's 100 gigabytes to download. This new demographic doesn't want that. They want to get in quickly, they want to interact, they want to transact, they want to socialize, and then they want to get the hell out. So we have to think about that infrastructure. And there's a very fine balance. It can't, I think, be via just via HTML5 quite yet. And it's probably not going to be done by dropping an Unreal 5 engine, right? If you're going to have some people just have a very short experience, they're probably not going to take the time to download 100 gig to play Warzone on a $5,000 PC, right? So we have to be thinking a lot of that as this as well. So one thing we've been thinking about, and we've been investing heavily in a tech called Polystream. So Polystream was a really interesting company out of the UK that we acquired last year. And the reason we thought this was really interesting is that there's been a lot of attempts at streaming games from the cloud, right? The challenge with that, if you have big projects like Google Stadia and PlayStation Now and all these groups, right? There's some big challenges with streaming games in the cloud. First and foremost, you have to have a GPU per user because you're rendering the game as if it's on your device, right? So you have to have a GPU for every single user in the cloud. So if I want to suddenly scale up a concert, imagine the Travis Scott concert that happened in Fortnite, you could have 1 million people suddenly enter that world. To do that, you have to have 1 million GPUs in the cloud. So one, that's pretty cost prohibitive for almost everybody, maybe outside of Facebook, I don't know. They can throw some money at it, but most developers, most companies won't be able to do that. And so what we looked at and what Polystream did, and I think this is where the tech is going to evolve, is they have a new tech to where they can actually look at the draw call data that comes out of the engines themselves. So before it gets to the GPU, the data that goes to the GPU to make the images look good, we compress that data. And then we send that to a local thin client on a Mac or PC or console or wherever. And what's exciting about that now is that you can do that with CPUs. So you can now, just like any other web infrastructure that's in the cloud, you can scale this infinitely. And we think this is really, really important. Now, what happens is it's not video that outputs, it's still a client. So there's a little bit of friction because you have to have a client. But we tested this with Blankos. So we took Blankos, our game here, and we ran a bunch of analytics, and we looked at the compression, and we looked at the encoding and decoding, and we were able to get that game down from an 8 gigabyte install to a 5 megabyte install. So you could literally go from a Twitter feed into a 3D world in 15 to 30 seconds. And that starts getting exciting. And then once you do it one time, it's instant the time after that. So we've been looking at a lot of this, and the other exciting part with this too is that if you're gonna play in this world, is what does that look like? How do you sustain that? So we looked at things like Netflix. Netflix is a 10 megabyte or 10 megabit a second stream, right? So if you're watching Netflix, which most everybody probably has done, it's about 10 megabits a second to your device. So we were able to get this game running with 60 frames a second in about a steady state about 2.5 megabits. So about a fourth of what Netflix runs starts happening there. So this is exciting. This is where we think Metaverse goes next, because now you can have full, massive game experiences that are run persistently in the cloud, and you can bring them to any device and in a very fast and rapid pace. So we're very excited to where this goes in Metaverse. And I think adoption of this type of technology will be a very big key in growing these worlds to huge audiences. So the last area I want to kind of talk about is our guiding principles. And I will admit, I don't know if Daniel's here, but one of my team actually came up with these, and so I'm using his slides here. But I think what we figured out is there's kind of a few guiding principles we're building off of. And we want to share these because I think these are really important in terms of how you build for these worlds. So first and foremost, hopefully, player first. So again, we'll talk about this over and over and over. These worlds have to be player first. You have to be thinking about the experience. You have to build experiences that they want to be in, because that builds trust. Trust will build longevity around these worlds. So I think that's our first and foremost, where we're heading. Mass adoption. I think this is so critical, and I think we're getting very close as an industry on where this goes. We're starting to see several worlds now that are in the single millions. And I was in a panel a while back with some of the early Web3 games, and they're all high-fiving, like we hit 1 million, and we're like, that's awesome. But there's 4 billion gamers, so we're not quite there yet. So we'll do a little light high five, and then let's figure out how we go to mass adoption. And I think where we think about that is it has to be seamless, right? One thing we even think about is that do you have to even use the word NFTs or blockchain in games? It's something we debate all the time, right? I go to a game, I'm not talking about, oh yeah, this game is built on AWS. This game is built on Google Cloud. No one cares. No one cares. All they care about is the functionality. Gamers are the same. So we think a lot about that. Like, how do we think about, do we even need to talk about this? Or do we just provide them with a great experience? Come into the game, start playing. Sure, you'll have to KYC at some point, but try and reduce that friction, and that's how we get millions of players into games. I also think we're already starting to see some of the first parties. We've had conversations. There's basically seven major first parties in gaming, right? You have Apple and Google, you have Microsoft and Sony, you have Steam and Epic, right? So those are did I get them all? I'm missing one. Nintendo. Sorry, Nintendo's the 7th. And so we've already had conversations with all of them. Some of them have challenges right now, and they're not going to quite adopt this yet. Some of them are actually challenges. It's not just a political decision. It's actually a regulatory decision. So groups like Steam, they have challenges, right? But a lot of them are starting to cave. A lot of them are starting to be like, cool, let's do this. Yeah, let's figure this out. They're still very nervous about a lot of topics. They're nervous about, gamers. There's 4 billion gamers in the world. They have this amazing ability. I don't know how they do it, but they lose their password every single day. It's just this amazing skill set gamers have to lose their password. So the idea that a lot of these platforms have is like, I don't want my players to suddenly lose their private keys and they lost Zelda. How terrible would that be? That would actually ruin the entire industry. So thinking about a mass adoption is absolutely critical in how we move forward as an industry. Oh, sorry, I have weird builds here. Progressive web. So again, I think we're all working as a collective industry pretty well in this. How do we kind of move these concepts forward? How do we move concepts of DAOs forward? How do we move all these cool things together? And I think what I love is there's a lot of progressive thoughts here about that. And I think sometimes we're a little too progressive maybe for the mainstream audience. We had a group that was talking, and they're like, you know what? We see a world very soon to where every decision in games are going to be built by a DAO. And I'm like, there's a lot of great principles around that, right? And there definitely will be certain worlds that will be 100% built by a DAO. But coming from Call of Duty, I had every 12-year-old in the planet that would meet me would say, I got an idea. You want to hear my idea? I'm going to build the biggest bomb in the game. It's going to kill everybody on every server. And that's what I want to contribute to Call of Duty. And I'm like, well, that's not really a game now, is it? You just won. I mean, that's not super exciting. So I think we have to think about this, right? Games are art. Games take vision. Game teams are very important. But I think what we are seeing is progressive abilities to include it more and more and more. Tokenized guilds. How do we think about your social structures in games, right? We have to move forward as an industry with this. Ecosystem friendly as well. I'm a very big believer in this. We got questions a lot when we first started Mythical in 2018 of, well, why blockchain? Can't you do this centralized? Roblox did it. Fortnite's kind of doing it. Yeah, that's true. I mean, they are. But I do believe that as we move to a world of millions and millions of stakeholders and billions of consumers using this, the principles of blockchain are absolutely phenomenal. Immutability, composability, transparency, trust, building that trust. And I think that's really, really important to be ecosystem friendly. And what I honestly think is we're going to see a divide of the world soon. We're going to see some worlds that want to stay centralized, and we're going to see that, and that's fine. And a lot of them have critical mass to be able to do that for a while. But then we're going to see more and more and more companies collectively come together, and I think that's so critical and something we want to believe in, we want to push forward as from Mythical's perspective, is let's build this as an ecosystem. I'm sorry about the builds here. Okay, there we go. Network effects. This is a pretty classic gaming mechanic, but we're definitely thinking about, what is that journey, right? And that journey now is not only just within a game and within experiencing one brand, but then experiencing all of our games, right? So how do you start interacting with all of our games? And then how do you experience everybody interacting with other games, right? So we use the concept, obviously, people talk about interoperability. I'm all for it. I think there's some technical challenges there. Again, I'm going to go back to Call of Duty. We had, in Call of Duty, I don't know if you know, there's 3 different Call of Duty engines that get rotated through every year. So Infinity Ward has one that does more the Modern Warfare side. Treyarch has one that does the Black Ops side, and then Sledgehammer had one that they did a bunch of stuff, Advanced Warfare. They did the Vanguard, I think, something like that. So three engines that are all Call of Duty. We had a hard time getting a soldier from one game, or on one engine, into a soldier of the other engine. And we owned all 3 engines, right? It's not easy to move stuff back and forth. But what I do like to think about is compatibility, right? Maybe it's not just fully interoperability, but compatibility. So great. I mean, I see a world very soon to where you could have Sandbox and Blankos together, and you can actually run those both in the cloud, and an asset could move seamlessly from one game to the other. Maybe you're not even leaving a client. You use a Polystream, you don't have to leave the client. I could walk through a portal, a pixelized portal, or basically like a sandbox-style portal, a voxel portal, and suddenly my character can be verified using blockchain, and maybe it's not interoperable, but it's compatible, so it'll shift to a different version of that character, right? So I think that's really interesting, and I think these are things we got to think about is what is that experience, not just within our worlds, not within our connected worlds, but with the entire industry. And then last is scale, and this is something we constantly think about. We're already trying to play heavily into these big worlds. We're starting to think about netcodes, right? So again, that's maybe not a topic for this one, but like netcodes can break quickly. Netcodes can be very, how do we think about how client and server react? And I think that scale is going to shift. So I think we're going to see new things as we run these big worlds virtually and run them in the cloud. We're going to see new ways of how you interact. How do you interact with fans that are watching, right? Imagine these big groups like the esports, like the 100 Thieves of the world. When they have a player that jumps into one of these worlds, they'll have 100,000 people that follow. How do we bring them into the world? How do we do that and scale that outside of just video, right? So these are things we definitely think about, and we want to share these because I thought they're great principles for the entire industry. But this is kind of where we think it goes. So thank you so much. That's my talk. I'd love to answer. I have a few minutes left. We have like 5 or 6 minutes left. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take that. Yeah. Yeah. Talk a little bit about why you chose the blockchain you guys went with and how you use that to scale. That's a great question, man. That's a heated question right there. So the question was talking about mass adoption and scale. What blockchain did we choose and why, basically, right? So I'll share a little bit on this. So we started in 2018. We were pretty early. We saw some challenges early on with proof of work. So we were very concerned about proof of work, and we thought, having these massive fees and things like that of Ethereum and all these other networks was very scary, right? If you're selling a $200,000 ape, more power to you. You can go pay a $70, $80 fee because it's fairly cheap. We're in the game world. We're selling $10 items, $20 items. We couldn't afford for a player to list an item on OpenSea at $60 and then sell it and take it down for another $60. So we were very big about proof of stake in 2018. At the time, EOS.io was EOS, Block One, all that was. I thought they were the best in the world in proof of stake. So we actually adopted that tech early on. Blankos is still on that tech. I will admit we are moving to a new chain. We've been working on a new chain for a while. I think we're thinking very heavily around EVM compatibility. I think that's been critical. We've kind of built our own layer of EVM compatibility around it. What we have been also thinking about is things like custody of accounts. This is very important for us in our world. So we definitely think having a permission chain is very important for the game side. And the reason for that, again, is talking to the Sonys and the Microsofts and the Epics and all that, tying it back and signing the private keys by the account. So in case you lose that password, you're not losing that key. So we do have a permission chain. And so it is a little bit, we get a little flack for it. It's like, well, you're not truly Web3. Okay, we're Web 2.5, you know, and I'm fine with that. We're fine being Web 2.5. But what we did then is we're like, how do we go next, right? So the next step was basically we added bridges, so you could bridge it in and out. And then eventually we want to go full non-custodial accounts, but I think we're not quite ready for that. So we are moving chains. We'll have a big announcement in a few months here. We've been working. We have a test net up of our own right now. It's a full EVM compatible chain. We think EVM compatibility is still really, really critical right now. It's just what, you know, education-wise, monetarily, that's where most of the money is. So that's what we're thinking right now. It's been an evolution for us as well, even in the last few years. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Hey, John, could you talk a little bit about betting, gambling, the other big trend, and both with respect to sports and maybe other kinds of games, video games?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, betting and all that. So I'll take it one step further. I think there's also a concept of pay to win, right? Which is more, something we watch for as well. So in games, games, I think we're always watching not to have pay to win. So I think things like that internally, we think about things like, okay, a lot of these skin economies and all that, they do really well. But let's think about vanity, right? Because if you suddenly vanity items a little bit more than functionality or have canned functionality that people bid into. So when we think about UGC, creator economy and all that, we start thinking about principles like that in terms of like, you can't just have somebody come in and say, cool, I want to have the most powerful item in the game, because everybody will do that, right? And you lose balance of a game. But in terms of like actual gambling, we don't do that. I think there's a lot of gray lines of what's happening right now. So we're trying to push the envelope in terms of how do we protect consumers at all costs? But is there ways you can start putting my NFT up against your NFT, right? And winner takes all. Things like that we're trying to move forward on. In terms of like sports betting and all that and actual true gambling, we don't touch that personally. I think what's kind of interesting is that because it's an open ecosystem, you could theoretically take our NFL assets and you could go do something on your own, right? We're not touching it, but it's an NFT that you own. So I think the way we view it right now, there's groups like DraftKings, right, that are coming in. They're building on NFTs as well, or building on NFTs in blockchain. I think they're on a Polygon chain right now. So the idea is I think there'll be compatibility to where items from the gaming world can be used for stuff like that, but it's going to be regulated, and it's something we're keeping a very arm's length transaction right now. But I do think you'll see a little bit of a blending. We're definitely trying to see certain cases. It's something that comes up all the time. Horse racing is a great example. A horse racing game we've gotten pitched by a lot of developers. And it's a little too gray for us, so I think we're trying to be very careful in thinking about the breeding side and how do you have the horse angle rather than, hey, I'm putting my horse against yours and we're going to put money against it. That's just not something we're touching right now. So if that helps. All right, we got a couple minutes left, maybe one or possibly two more questions. Have anything? Yeah.
You were talking about collectibles.
Yeah.
So are you guys going to have like a integration system like Skylanders to like maybe input the collectible into the game?
Like physical collectibles?
Yeah.
So that's a great question. It's an area I'm very passionate about. So my last project at Activision I did before I left and did a mobile studio was a mobile Skylanders game called Skylanders Battlecast. And this is like maybe 2014, so this is still, very early blockchain days, very much before CryptoKitties and things like that. So one thing we wanted to do is we said, okay, look, Hearthstone really redefined the genre for Magic, right? They took Magic the Gathering, this huge audience, and they simplified it in a digital format. And they really disrupted that industry. So we started thinking about Skylanders. We're like, well, we have physical toys in retail. We're in every Toys R Us and Walmart and Target and everything in the world. So what if we go after cards for life, right? And go after Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And things like that. So we decided saying, hey, let's build these cards and sell physical cards that can become digital items. And what was interesting about that is we started running into some challenges, right? The first one was basically, how do we verify that asset? How do we verify you didn't photocopy that and put it somewhere else? So what we ended up doing is we invented a new process. It's kind of a QR code, but it was built into the art of the card. You wouldn't really tell as a consumer unless you knew. It was a little weird notch pattern around the edge. And we had 100 million unique cards that were printed at the printing manufacturer. And with those, we could tell you in 50 milliseconds, we could use computer vision and your iPhone or iPad camera. We could read that card and tell you exactly what that card was, who owned that card, what the rarity was. We could tell you everything. It's writing that information. And what was cool there is it was our first time we actually had a physical item, a very secure physical item that translated one-to-one to a digital item. The next challenge real quick was the interesting part there was then we were like, how do we print 100 million cards that are all 1200 or 2400 DPI, full res, without doing a big printing press line, because everyone was different. So we identified a lot of those challenges. I'm very passionate about it. It was one of my favorite games I've ever made. And it was really, it led us to Mythical, frankly, because it became this verifiable connection between the physical and digital world. So I definitely see we're doing more of that. A lot of people are doing QR codes. That does work. I don't think it's quite as cool, in gaming world. But I think there's going to be more and more and more. And both the other way, too, digital to become physical. Probably the #1 request we get at Blankos is, I want my physical toy. We're thinking about it. I think we start losing a little bit of design ground because we want to have gold shaders and neon shaders, and that's hard to translate to a printing process or a physical printing process. But we're definitely thinking through physical to digital and digital to physical. I think it's going to be a huge industry in general. So, all right. Well, thank you. I think I'm out of time. I'm getting the flashing red light. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.